Hello and welcome. My name is Trismegistus, and today we're going to be reading through and speculating about the most recent Friday Facts. The Friday Facts is divided into two sections this week, and I will be inserting speculation about the first section as we go along, and the second section will be a straight read. Friday Facts 376, Research and Technology. Hello. This week we will talk about some technology and research related changes coming in 2.0 and the space age expansion. Quality Clarifications by Croverix. It was rather interesting to read the reactions to the last Friday Facts 375 about quality. It sparked a lot of debate and we noticed a lot of misconceptions about it. So we would like to address some of the biggest ones. Firstly, when you don't put quality modules somewhere, everything works as before, so you don't have to sort everything everywhere as some people thought. So just to clarify, they're making the point that if the machine doesn't have a quality module in it, then it won't produce quality items. The quality items that it does produce will be dictated by that probabilistic chart, but when there's no quality modules, you won't produce quality items, so you don't have to do sorting on every single part of your factory. This seems like a good move to me. I think it's in line with what they said. I think people just got the wrong end of the stick. Secondly, the random aspect of the mechanic seems to be very upsetting to a lot of people. I have to agree. Though there are a lot of situations where I hate the randomness in games, but the context really matters greatly. For example, I decided to never ever play Settlers of Catan again, as the random dice rolls can decide the winner of the game way too often for my liking. But the Factorio case is very different. The reason is that you rarely depend on the random result, because you, hopefully, produce at a large scale, and the law of large numbers will just transform probabilities into ratios. The more you produce, the more it evens out. They're making the point that the probability tables they talked about, because when you produce 1 million items, a probability table just turns into a distribution of numbers. So if you've produced 1 million circuits and there's a 10% chance of a particular quality of circuits dropping, then you will end up with 10% of 1 million as the quality. When you scale up, which is what you do in Factorio, you can then rule out the probability. From a personal point of view, I think the confusion may have got, I mean, I understood this, but then I've done a lot of stats, background in sort of physics and maths, so I didn't, I wasn't surprised by that. It didn't worry me at all. But where some of the confusion may have come in is where they were talking about having a small area in the factory at the very start of the game where they're trying to roll the dice basically to get high quality power armor. So it may have given the impression that it's more like a gacha mechanic or something like that. So I think they just worried some people, but to me that it doesn't seem like a problem. 3. The core of what makes Factorio good is that the horrible huge grind you would need to get all of the resources can be mitigated by automation. It is quite similar with quality, as the annoyance of the grind and unpredictability related to randomness in other games can be just pummeled by the sheer output of your factory. So this is the same point again, basically, that Factorio is about, large production. What that means to you is different for each individual player, but even with a relatively small build, when you're needing to produce a very large number of rocket parts, you're going to need to either run the factory for a very long time or produce in very large numbers. And so the fact that it's a percentage-based system doesn't matter. They don't actually make this point in this one, but uranium is a probability-based thing, and it's optional. You don't have to play with it, just like quality. But also, we're all used to setting up a small uranium processing facility quite early on in the game, leaving it, and then coming back and finding that we've got enough uranium to kickstart Coverix, and therefore run nuclear power. So, to me, it's just a similar sort of idea in terms of Factorio. I would also say that this is actually one of the things I really like about Factorio. I played quite a lot of such survival games and other factory-based games, and the thing with Factorio is that it just gets that scaling system, gets that automation, gets the production systems right. It's why it's my favourite game, because survival games are, you're doing a lot of hand grinding, and you can get all sorts of different ways of working around that, but Factorio just nails it. It's just perfect. And this is what they're saying, that once you understand the games, once you understand the mechanics of how everything works, how to do volume production, then quality is just an interesting mechanic to play with. It's not massively changing the game. It's if you don't want it to, but if you do, then it gives you a lot of options to play with. Fourth point is that the simple approach is to produce all the ingredients in normal quality. So most of the factory typically produces non-quality stuff and mainly provides for research, non-quality, and a huge amount of items to be processed by the small quality part. In our playthroughs, the parts of the factory which were dealing with the quality were less than 5% of the whole factory. So don't worry about being forced to solve all the mixed quality items everywhere. I think that's a little confusingly written. The idea is almost like a branching fork. So you've got your normal factory doing the normal production, and then you're doing this quality side of it as well. You're sort of reiterating the same point that it's an optional mechanic. It's very much separate and like additional to rather than a replacement. Clearly, that was a lot of people had a lot of problems with that. I didn't. To me, it was that side of it was exciting. My issue was just with the whole naming, which they come on to in a second. And the fifth point, the names are the easiest thing to change. Maybe I don't take myself and the game too seriously and found it amusing, but if we had a very good counter proposal which feels good and it is clear when it comes to tiers, we can still change it. So they're basically saying that whole using the RPG mechanic is just something that they went with, and there is a familiarity aspect to it from a lot of gamers. They know that tiering system. My problem with it always, and just to explain, I never really sort of explained it last time, is an uncommon item isn't a reflection of a quality. So if an item is uncommon and rare as well, so uncommon and rare, they're just reflections of commonality, basically. So how often do you get something? Oh, it's uncommon, it's rare. Okay, that doesn't mean it's of a high quality. The next two, epic and legendary, you can say, right, well, that reflects how good they are. This is an epic item, this is a legendary item. So those two are quality statements. My problem with really, is you're mixing in a thing that's talking about rarity with a thing that's talking about quality, and it never makes. It's not a progression of levels. So you could say common, uncommon, rare, very rare, almost doesn't exist. I mean, I know there are. This is one of the problems. You don't have a good naming system, but I think it should be more like normal quality, high quality, exceptional quality, epic quality, legendary. I think something like that makes more sense as a quality system. Or, and what I'm sure I'll probably do in the game, is basically just refer it to number by. So this is level 1 quality, level 2 quality, level 3 quality, level. I'm sure that's what I'll end up doing as a naming system. And that's not a Factorio thing. That's just a fundamental thing with that naming system. Bullet 6. The fact that there isn't just the one blueprint for circuits, etc., because it depends on the stage of the game and your dedication to quality, is something we see as an improvement. Either you have more blueprints for different stages of the game, or you have to improvise more. And mainly, if you actually shoot for the best setups, you can still have the same approach as with beacons, that you build for a legendary setup and just accept that this is not perfect now and upgrade it as you get more of the good items. Very similar with beacon setups before full tier 3 modules are available. To be honest, this one didn't even occur to me as maybe a problem or something that people would be complaining about. I guess it reflects that some people do play just by downloading blueprints, or they go with Neolause's blueprints and basically just use them or take them as inspiration maybe and build their own sort of versions of them. My sort of view on it is you can still do that. I mean, Neolaus, I'm sure, will do the setups that work best for his way of building that city block style. The basic point is you'll still be able to download blueprints and use them. I guess the other thing to it is this point that, and this is, it's reflected in, my blueprint series that I've been doing, where there are different tiers of blueprints as you go through the game. So there's your grey assembly machine blueprints, your blue assembly machine blueprints, your green assembly machine blueprints, your beacon blueprints, your 8 beacon, your 10 beacon, your 12 beacon blueprints. So there are different ways of building essentially the same thing with different efficiency, etc., etc. And typically that's how you do blueprints. You sort of upgrade, whether it's through the upgrade planner or you tear it down and rebuild. And that's just what they're saying, basically. It's just another system for doing that. So you could have your initial build that builds, the first set of quality items. And then as you get more and more quality items, you've got another build that you replace that with. And that builds higher and higher levels, and eventually you get to your final build. This is part of the fun of the games to me, is designing these things. So I say this seems like, as it says, an improvement. It seems like it's a good thing that it's adding more of that type of mechanic or that type of requirement. That's the stuff I love. So So I don't really see why people are complaining about that, but there you go. Bullet 7. I used the "it's optional" argument, but I didn't mean it as an excuse for "it's poopy, but it's okay," because you don't have to use it. I understand that if the mechanics provide an upgrade, you can't say it is optional, as our game or optimizer brains are just programmed to progress to better stuff. And it is painful to decide to ignore some better stuff just because I don't like the mechanics to get there. This leads to the biggest proverb we always repeat: the best strategy needs to be fun. The main part of the optionality was that you decide optionally where and when you want to use it. There are still players who prefer to play without beacons and modules, so some value in the optionality for these exists as well. I guess the point is that some of the item improvements aren't necessarily brilliant. Like walls just get a bit more health, and gun turrets have a bit more range. They don't have a bit more damage. It's bullets that have damage. Well, that's the point actually. I guess flamers won't ever get a damage boost from legendary because you couldn't produce legendary oil, I don't think. Maybe you can. But yeah, so you could make an argument that actually some of the improvements aren't all that good. But there's that bit in all of our brains. It's why we love Factorio, that doing it better, doing it optimal, doing it more efficient, whatever ticks your particular box, is better. It's the numbers go up, which is basically kind of the basis of all. It's why every game is like an RPG, in that if you get improvements, your number goes up. And so having that system for everything, some people are going to get into a loop of saying, right, I've got to get better belts, I've got to get better everything, even though what it's giving you isn't necessarily all that beneficial. So it's more like, right, well, in this particular aspect, so when I'm producing, rocket control units and low density structures and the really expensive, really slow stuff, I want to do that with better machines. I'm not fussed, probably, unless I use them to make things, but having legendary green circuits, who cares? They don't actually do anything other than give you access, or improved access, to the ability to make legendary assemblers, legendary recyclers, etc. To me, it's not a thing. Okay, the last bullet then. So the last very frequent opinion was that it would be better to use this opportunity to introduce a lot of interesting custom recipes to get all the qualities of different items. But avoiding this was the cornerstone of the design. I can only design the game around what I enjoy, and I just don't enjoy having to keep track of a huge number of unique recipes which all work technically basically the same. The fact that the most simple approach, mostly, means using similar blueprints to produce different kinds of quality items is generally a goal, as it helps to downscale the time investment needed to progress, since this is just one of the expansion mechanics, and we want to keep the game time reasonable. I would compare it to repeating the design of rail intersections. No one is complaining that they can repeat their blueprint in many places, because we have blueprints and construction Revits to avoid the grind related to building repeating patterns. In other words, there is a relatively straightforward way to go through it and get the best items, but the design still allows for some very non-trivial custom setups if you want to optimize more and enjoy the theory crafting. Easy to learn, hard to master. This is very much where I agree with him. It's one of the reasons I always kind of avoided a lot of the mods, the overhaul mods. It's like when I played Bob's, basically, and I got to a stage where I was kind of fed up just building another improved version of a boiler, another improved version of a solar panel, another improved version of a chemical lab, that sort of thing. So to me, they're not new mechanics. You are introducing more processing steps, and I appreciate that for a lot of Factorio players, that is enjoyable. They enjoy having more of those processing steps, and that's why, Pyanodons and all these big overhaul mods are enjoyable for them, because they mean that they've got to process titanium, aluminium, whole big long list of ingredients. They're basically saying that there is a limit to that for what they want in the base game. Clearly, there are going to be some more materials. They do mention this later on in the blog post, and we know there's going to be different types of machines. This quality system, and this is where I kind of agree with them. If you're making the same basic thing, having it be the same basic layout, and you can then swap in different specific recipes, is better, because you can just use the same design, repeat it ad nauseum, And because you've got the bots, as they mentioned, it takes away the grind of doing it. And clearly they are going to introduce some more mechanics, some more things. We've seen grinders on the platform, and they've got those grabby arms. So there are going to be new mechanics, new things, new systems. But they're trying to balance keeping it reasonable. And to me, the point with this one is these big overhaul mods, they'll probably get updated and they'll work with Space Age. And if you want that grind, there it is. You know, it comes via mods. So to me, they shouldn't be building it around, you know, a particular niche of players who really enjoy that grind. So 100% agree with them there. Overall, the design was driven by our enjoyment. We play the game and we don't want to bloat it with grindy clutter. I can't expect everyone to enjoy the games the same way I do. It is okay and I respect that. But I believe there will be enough players who will enjoy the ride with us. Again, I would 100% agree with them there. This is a simple build to create Assembling Machine 3 in quality. If there's more than 100 of any quality, it recycles them, hoping to get the next tier. The build only receives the basic ingredients from the normal factory, and all the quality complications remain here. In early stages, you'll likely have just a few of these kinds of builds for items you prioritise the most. However, with time, you will likely add more of these, with which some more upcoming features might help you. Winking smiley face. So basically, to explain what they're saying is that they showed quite what I, said was quite a complicated build. It wasn't actually that complicated, but the way they'd done it was sort of quite compacted. And they were using those filter splitters, which I know some players are a bit confused by. And especially with them introducing this greater than or equal system, and it looked like a very complicated build. And what they're saying is actually you can do a lot simpler stuff. So let's have a look at the full thing. The point they're making is that what's coming in from the rest of the factory is the level 2 assemblers and the level 1 speed modules, and these are being fed into the assembly machines at the top. You then got much more basic splitters. These are filtered, so basically the level 1s come out here, level 2 come out here, level 3 come out here, level 4 come out here, level 5 come out here, and you're basically feeding around. So these are whatever machines you've got being sorted in a very simple way. They're then going into machines, and these have got what they're talking about, the more than 100, is that it's got a circuit condition on it. That if there are more than 100 of those items, then it puts them out on the belts, basically. So it'll always fill up with 100, and then it'll put the rest into recyclers. And of course, the recyclers have a bigger chance of spitting out higher quality modules, which then feeds back in here. These then build them. So the quality, coming out of here is split into this splitter has a greater than on it. So basically anything that's above normal quality gets sent round to these machines, which will then build them into the appropriate quality, and then they go feed back into the system. But otherwise, the level 1 stuff goes back round, and of course, it's just being processed again. So it's a very simple couple of loops type system, and that's kind of the point they're making. You don't need that really, really complicated back and round and forth and up and down and thing they were doing on the other one. Discovering new materials by V. When it comes to how planets, and especially their unique resources, are discovered, we have realised problems with how Factorio has been doing this for a while now. If a planet is unlocked by a technology on some science tier, then the starting resources of the planet would also be gated behind these same science packs. Because what else? You don't have anything else available yet. This would mean that you could, and most typically would, already be researching ways to process the new unique resource that you have not yet even seen yet. Another most fundamental conflict was that we wanted the progress on each planet to result in a single new science pack, resulting in a chicken or egg situation. The problem will be, this science pack should need most of the new unique processing steps on that planet, therefore you need to somehow get to discovering the processing first. The alternative would have been that the science pack is made available immediately on arrival, but then it couldn't really be too interesting, as it wouldn't include any of the processing you have discovered past that point. The science pack is the primary export for each planet. So in order to prevent planets being just simple mining outposts with a rocket silo, we wanted to make sure most of the processing contributes to produce such science pack. We've tried to design and implement several approaches in various forms of temporary science packs and even special entities that would act as temporary laboratories, but all of them were just adding mess that wasn't useful afterwards, as it was just a stepping stone to get back to producing a proper science pack that you would eventually ship back to laboratories on your home planet. Trigger technologies. The solution that ticks all the boxes is, in the end, incredibly simple. We added a new method of researching a technology. Instead of processing science packs in a laboratory, technology can now be completed with a trigger. Currently, we have a few technology triggers that unlock research. Mining an entity, crafting an item or fluid, launching a rocket with a certain item. This means that each time you land on a planet, you discover and exploit its new resources in a way that feels quite natural, as everything happens while you're actually there. This will make a lot more sense with specific examples once we show you the actual planets and not just this technical background, but there's more. We can apply this elsewhere. As we're sure you remember, there are times even in the base game where you do discover new resources, specifically oil and uranium processing. Just like researching processing up for a new resource on a different planet, it's similarly strange for the same reasons that you can research deep into oil refining tech tree while you still haven't even seen a crude oil patch yet, or unlocking nuclear reactors without having met uranium. So they give here the oil processing and uranium processing technology descriptions from within what is presumably within version 2.0. The basic point is that these trigger technologies are the green text here. So this entity crude mine, entity crude oil, mine, entity uranium oil. And the basic point is, as I say, this idea that you have to go and find oil, you have to stick an oil derrick on it. Oil derricks presumably are still, red and green science. But you don't unlock oil processing now until you've mined or pumped some oil. You don't unlock uranium processing until you've mined some uranium. Now, in order to really get into oil processing, you will need to have touched some crude oil. This helps prevent the situation where, especially in the green science tier, a lot of players would research very far ahead from what their factory can currently process, and then later feel discouraged seeing all the piled up recipes to work through. Early game. There's more coming from this. When you crash land on the very first planet, why does the player immediately know how to craft steam engines, inserters, transport belts? It always feels much better in games when your progression starts as low as possible and you can earn all of the things in the process, which makes it all feel much more deserved in the end. With the triggers, we could create new technologies for even basic things like pipes, early power generation, labs, and automation science packs. And so it shows the steam power and electronics technologies in the game. These now have requirements for steam power of 50 iron plate production, and it also then of course unlocks the productions. So you can't produce your steam power pipes and your offshore pump etc. until you've got steam power. Electronics requires copper plate production, and of course copper wire, electronic circuits, labs, inserters, etc. are part of that technology, and that all now makes a lot more sense. You don't know how to craft an inserter until you've done electronics, and you can't work out electronics until you've done copper plate. Some unlocks, like electric mining drill, radar, or repair packs, don't need to be available at the very beginning. So in turn, we could add them into their own new red science technologies. So caption on the diagram here, early game technology graph. You can also see, for example, steel axe technology now requires you to craft actual steel plates, so you can't just get the steel axe upgrade without having made steel, which has always been weird since steel axe is no longer a real item. As a result, the following will be all of your starting recipes. Getting back to having unlocked all the recipes you are used to at the start doesn't really take any extra time than previously. Earlier trigger technologies only require a minimal amount of items to be crafted, but it still contributes to making the progression feel better. As will become apparent with more things in future Friday Facts, during the development of the expansion, we have arrived to various topics, just like this one, which stretched beyond the acceptable weirdness threshold and had to address it in Space Age. The improvements also impacted the base game in a good way, and we are certain that mods will make good use of all this as well. Research Queue Always On by Cloner. Research Queue was a feature that was long requested, and after initially adding it, some playtesting of the game with the feature enabled led us to feel that it had significant drawbacks. After some more playtesting and community feedback, we settled on a compromise whereby the research queue can be enabled with a map setting when starting the game. This was okay, but it came with its own problems. A major source of frustration was when you would start the game, play for a while, only to realise after a few hours that you, or your friend who started the server, forgot to enable the research queue. There was not a way to enable the queue after starting without using console commands, which would of course disable achievements. During 1.1 development, we wanted to address the problem of new recipe discoverability a little bit better, so we added the recipe notifications. The recipe notifications meant that one of the initial negatives of the research queue, for new players and discovering items, was no longer present. Over the years, there have also been a fair share of bugs relating to the research queue that we have had to fix, and having two code paths and GUI layouts in all the places, queue versus no queue, was becoming annoying. In the end, we decided to just completely embrace the research queue and remove all the code relating to not having it enabled. So now, it is always on, and you cannot turn it off. There is no off. There is no longer the strange after you launch the rocket condition for the queue, and no longer will you ever forget to enable it before starting the game. Productivity researches by Cloner. We wanted to add some more infinite technologies and also reduce the resource pressure as the game goes along. The mining productivity is great and it works very well, but it doesn't give the player much choice in the endgame. The other infinite technologies are more specialised, lots of combat ones, but other than maybe worker robot speed, not much for your production. So, we added a new type of productivity research, the recipe productivity research. Each level will increase the built-in productivity of certain recipes, such as steel, processing units, rocket control units, etc. We also wanted to let you unlock something super powerful for the endgame, which led us to the idea of the research productivity. Each level will increase the built-in productivity of your labs, and as you might know, that is the most effective place for your productivity modules already. It will require the end-game resources, of which details will come in some future Friday Facts. So it shows here the Rocket Control Unit Productivity 2, so they've already done a level 1. It is an infinite research, as they've said, and the description here, Rocket Control Unit Productivity plus 10%. So just picking up this first point about discovering new materials, it's a little confusingly written, in my opinion. The point they make later on about the red and green science is like a better explanation. It's something I've commented on quite a lot with Factorio, in that you are basically given two sets of science packs, red and green, at the beginning of the game, and they take you a hell of a long way through the game, to the extent that it's almost problematic, and you are unlocking a whole series of technologies that you can't make yet. The point they're making, and I say it's a little confusing written, I think there's a couple of typos in it as well, or sort of misplaced words. You get to a new planet, we don't know what the new resources or processes are, but we are being told there are new resources and processes. If they left the approach as normal and made it so that, say, red, green and blue science, which we know are now needed for rockets, if they unlocked all of the researches required to process the materials on the new planet, then you would be able to research them before you even arrived. However, if you lock them to the actual resources, you can't research them, because if you, just using aluminium as an example, I've no idea whether aluminium's in the game, but if aluminium is a resource on a distant planet, then you need things like I don't know, electrolysis or what have you, however you're going to process that aluminium, they're unlocked from a previous tier of research. But that means when you're on Nalvis, you can research all the aluminium stuff. You would be able to build all of your machines if it involves new transport systems, or different bots, or something different to trains to move stuff about. You would be able to unlock all of that technology before you even got there. So you could literally turn up, clear the biters, stamp your stuff down, and you're done. And it all becomes trivial. It becomes just like a mining outpost, is their point, but it's on a different planet rather than further away in the game. So how do you fix that problem? Because you can't, as I say, make it so that processing the material requires the material, or doing the science requires the material. And one of their goals was that they wanted to have a science pack for each as the end goal for each planet. But how do you tie them up? One of the points they're making is it's a bit weird when you think about it, because you've researched new material without ever having seen it. This is where they've introduced these trigger technologies. So they make the point here that I've mentioned many times in my playthroughs. I think experienced players get a bit blasé about it, but particularly with red and green science, you can unlock a heck of a lot of the game, and it can be a bit overwhelming, I think, for new players when you've just set up a whole load of researches, especially now that they're unlocking the research queue from the very beginning. That's why they had it in there. It was like a hard stop for you to say, right, think about what you're doing next, think about what you're doing next, think about what you're doing next. And with that gone, you could just queue up loads and loads of researches, and then you realise I've got to make 20 different items. I don't even know where to start. I've got one smelter making iron. This is all just overwhelming. And with this new technology, you've got to go and find oil. You've got to go and find uranium. And uranium and oil, of course, are usually farther away. They're not in the starting area. So that suggests you've got to build a car. You've got to do those researches. You've got to power up in terms of combat so that you can fight any buds that are sat on those resources. So I think this is a very elegant solution to something that, as I say, I've always flagged as a bit of an issue in the game. I think this is a really elegant solution, and clearly that's how you gate off, or they're going to gate off the new resources. So if for example, it is aluminium on the new planet, you cannot even start the research for aluminium processing. And well, probably you could do the mining or something like that, depending on how you extract it. But basically, whatever that resource is, you can do the tech to be able to get it, but then you have to go to that planet and mine it or use it or what have you before you can actually unlock the rest of the tree. Even if you've got the production for the science packs, it blocks off the rest of the research that uses those science packs. So looking at the tech, the new version of the tech tree, these three technologies here and the steel axe have these gating conditions. So if we look at the example at the top, the steam engine, or steam power itself, is now locked behind you producing 50 iron plates, and electronics requires you to craft 10 copper plates. Interesting, those are the only research conditions. So for these, maybe there are others that require science packs as well, but for these, once you've done that thing, you've just automatically unlocked the research. It's like an RPG, again, where you basically, you go out and chop 50 trees and your woodsman level goes up. Very Stardew Valley, actually. Those two technologies that they've described here, steam power and electronics, they're required to do red science. Basically, red science you can build from the very beginning of the game, but now you have to have done these. So you have to have made some iron, made some copper. Now you can make some red science. And the point with the steel axe, as it says in the caption, is that that's gated behind producing steel. So you can't now simply do the steel axe research, even though you've not produced a single bit of steel, which again is always a bit weird. I really like this idea, and I think it should have been how they solved it before. Just a little note, I feel very seen with that. I am absolutely chronic for starting the game without research queue enabled, particularly playing with a friend. There's several games we've started that, it's been a realization that I completely forgot, because I usually host, and I completely forgot to enable the research queue. And he has to remind me to put it on. So yeah, I feel very seen with that comment. I will be totally honest, I'm not 100% sure I quite understand this. I think what it's saying is that you get more rocket control units out of a single craft. It's not a thing, so it doesn't have productivity in and of itself. So how can it increase its productivity? I say what I think this means is that it's the productivity of making those particular items. It's effectively like having productivity modules in as an extra bonus. This effectively says, right, well, if you now need to produce 10 rockets an hour or something, in the normal game you would have to produce all of that product. You'd have to produce all of the machines to do that. Whereas this gives the option of doing enough researches that you've got your single setup can now produce twice as many rocket control units over and above what you're getting out of productivity. And it sounds like there's going to be quite a few of them, and therefore that sort of makes sense. If you can boost the productivity of later items, then you can produce more with the same setup. This again comes back to my theory that they're trying to put in things that enable mega basing and also scale without increasing the number of machines, basically. So it comes back, I think, to the fact that if you want to go to 5 different planets, have big factories on each planet, you reach a point where you just can't manage that amount of stuff in the game, no matter how clever they are as programmers. You can't have a 10,000 science mega base on every single planet, because that's 50,000 science, and even the greatest will in the world, you couldn't do that. But if you can have a 1,000 science build that produces 10,000 science because you've upgraded productivity, you've got quality, you've got blah, 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 whatever these other productivity mechanics are, then that's a way of getting you the big numbers that we all like to have as gamers, without you having to have the world's most powerful PC and still run at 2 frames a second. So this is, I think, one of their ways of helping with the thing. I think it's a nice little touch, and I'm quite looking forward to really working with it in the game. The new materials thing is really interesting. I've said for a while that I was anticipating there would be new resources. We've not really properly seen it because the platform, when they announced Space Age, it was mining asteroids, but all it was doing was making bullets and water by the looks of things. We couldn't really tell what the fluids were, but it was clearly new ways of processing material were hinted at, grinding, the meteorites and what have you. Whether that's on land-based, I don't know as well. My anticipation, as I say, is we will get something like aluminium. I suspect we will also get extra fluids. I think there will be more subtlety to the fluid side of things with a different fluid. What to me they are saying is that things like bobs and planetons and what SpaceX itself does are way over what they're planning, but what they're planning will be a bit more nuanced and a bit more different. It will introduce new mechanics rather than just you need to build level 15 assembler machines, So yeah, I think we're getting new stuff like that. I say my guess would be aluminium and titanium maybe, because they are space, science, space materials basically. They're what they're made of, but you could imagine all sorts of stuff. And I don't think we'll get anything like this would be silicon, because that would mean changing a lot more fundamental stuff. If you're going to introduce silicon, then your chips and your solar panels and things like that would be made with silicon, I would have thought. Okay, so thoughts overall then. I like this. I really like the introduction of a different way of gating researches. I say that fixes something I've always struggled with. I like the idea of the productivity researches. I don't know if I've interpreted that properly. I hopefully have. I've always quite liked the idea of big bases and stuff like that, and simply being able to produce more with the same number of machines is always nice. I think that's a nice way of encouraging you to explore more of the game and sort of work with it and focus on things, etc., etc. Thoughts on the quality thing? I don't have any real change from my opinion from last week. Really looking forward to playing with it, and it works. Don't like the name. We're a game about accuracy and efficiency and blah blah blah. As I mentioned, having a naming system that switches from talking about rarity to quality is just rubbish, and that's not their fault. But if you're going to adopt that name, then you're going to carry the same weirdness to it. And I did explain in the last facts that when they make a die, when they make all the CPUs, some of them will just be better than others because of material imperfections and what have you. And that's where overclocking always used to come from. They're now so good that you don't tend to get any benefits from it. But they used to find they would make these chips and like 20% would be really high quality and perform a lot better than the others. But because of how they do the pricing, the highest speed chips have to attract a premium because of just how the business model works. And so if you've produced 20% of your chips that are 4 gigahertz chips, you can't really sell them at that price because you have to downclock them basically. You have to limit them and sell them as cheaper ones because you'll sell far more volumes that way. But you don't want to just give away cheap ones. You don't want to say, right, well, these 10% of high 4 gigahertz chips we're going to sell for cheaper, because then people will say, well, I want one of the cheap ones. I don't want one of the expensive ones. And you can't sell them all for the expensive because you just won't sell them all. So what you do is you downclock them. Essentially, you limit them. And therefore you get that nice profile of most ones are sold in the middle without people realizing that they've actually got something better. And that's where overclocking really used to come from, is that people would be able to unlock that extra potential in your particular chip. And it's why it was always very bespoke to you, because you might happen to have had one that really is a 3 gigahertz chip and you can't overclock it, or you might have got one that's 4 gigahertz and you can overclock it. So to me, it's a lot more like that. It reminds me a lot of that. And just because something is rare doesn't actually mean it's any better. In fact, maybe the opposite. If it's rare, it's probably a reject. I don't have any problems with this new system. I'm really looking forward to playing with it. And it's interesting that these were the points of feedbacks that they saw. You're always going to get this, I suppose, particularly with a game that's got so much in it. There's an element to it, I think, of it's just like a natural conservatism of, but you're changing the thing. I really like the thing. Don't change the thing. You're changing the thing. Why are you changing the thing? And so there's a natural reaction like that. And I think what they're really trying to emphasize here, it's completely optional. You just don't have to play with it. You can if you want. If you do, there's all sorts of stuff you can optimize and make better and improve and do differently. If that isn't for you, if that's too much detail, you don't need it. You can just ignore it. And the compromise position for most players is going to be, right, well, I want to produce the best quality personal equipment and weapons so that I can fight bugs most effectively. I want a legendary Spidertron. I'll just focus on building a legendary Spidertron. Entire rest of my factory is just normal. It's not quality at all. I think that's what it's trying to introduce into the game, as well as, I say, mechanisms for doing bigger factories for those who are interested in doing that sort of thing. So again, I don't have any real changes to my views on quality, but I say it was interesting that these were the points that needed clarification. I've mentioned before, I think we're going to get some tier 2 stuff, but their point is that they're not going to go nuts with it. Well, the reason I think that is because I think they'll be space related. I think it might be an actual thing you launch, like it could be almost like Dyson Sphere program. This is just my speculation, but you'll basically be able to launch as part of the space platform a space solar panel, basically, and it will be much more efficient and produce power. You might be able to transfer it between planets, I don't know, but I think that's how you'll be powering your space platforms, because we've not had any real hints about that, how power is going to work in space. Because, of course, if you're using nuclear power, that would require you to move the material up into space to fuel it. Same with coal, you would need to be, or any kind of oil product. So your basic option doesn't require movement of material would be solar panels, solar power. I mean, they could do something with charge, the charged particles, the solar wind, maybe. That would be a bit weird, a bit complicated sounding. It could just be normal solar panels, but to me, I think what we're getting is like space robots, space solar panels, maybe space accumulator, something like that. But yeah, so I think we're getting different versions of the technologies that relate to space. Maybe you can't use them on planets, and that's how they get around and vice versa. You can't use ordinary solar panels in space, and that's how they get around the level 15 laboratories and all this sort of stuff. But yes, I think that's where my brain is going, but I have absolutely no evidence for that whatsoever. Obviously, in this Friday Facts, we saw these, which look like new machines. This, as I speculated at the time, the orange one, looks like it's smelting something. This is a smelted material. This must be what's, a way of processing one of the new materials. I say it could be titanium, aluminium, it could be some made up material. That would tend to suggest perhaps that these are also ways of processing machines. We now know there are multiple planets, so maybe they relate to the multiple planets. So this is processing a resource on one planet, this processes it on another, this processes it on another. I love that. Acceptable weirdness threshold. That's a really good way of putting it. I say there are things in the game where it's like, but how do you do that? It's always a bit strange. I say one of the absolute classics, and it's basically loads of games. So it's not, it's just a generally accepted weirdness is that you can put chests in chests and you can stack up a ridiculous number of chests inside of chests. It's like, how does that work in terms of physics? Is a chest a little pocket dimension that you put these chests into? But that's an acceptable weirdness. I quite fancy having that on a t-shirt. In fact, if they want to produce an acceptable weirdness threshold t-shirt, I would absolutely buy one of those, assuming I get it in my size. Well, that's it for this week. I hope you've enjoyed the read-through and speculation. I'll be returning next week with the Friday Facts 377. If you'd like to join in the speculation, you can join my live stream on Twitch every Saturday afternoon. Thanks for watching. Cheers.